Hello, and welcome to Bookspot. I'm Earl Wajenberg. This time we're going to continue our reading of The Light Princess by George MacDonald. The Light Princess is one of those princesses with an evil fairy godmother who deprived her of her gravity at her christening. Now she only can be happy and only be heavy when she swims in the lake next to the palace. But the wicked fairy is draining the lake, and the only thing that can plug the hole is the body of a living man. So, of course, the prince has volunteered. Chapter 14. This is very kind of you. The prince went to dress for the occasion, for he was resolved to die like a prince. When the princess heard that a man had offered to die for her, she was so transported that she jumped off the bed, feeble as she was, and danced about the room for joy. She did not care who the man was. That was nothing to her. The hole wanted stopping, and if only a man would do, why take one? In an hour or two more, everything was ready. Her maid was dressed her in haste, and they carried her to the side of the lake. When she saw it, she shrieked and covered her face with her hands. They bore her across to the stone, where they had already placed a little boat for her. The water was not deep enough to float it, but they hoped it would be before long. They laid her on cushions, placed in the boat wines and fruits and other nice things, and stretched a canopy over all. In a few minutes the prince appeared. The princess recognized him at once, but did not think worth it to acknowledge him. "Here I am," said the prince. "Put me in." "They told me it was a shoeblack," said the princess. "So I am," said the prince. "I blackened your little boots 3 times a day because they were all I could get of you. Put me in." The courtiers did not resent his bluntness, except by saying to each other that he was taking it out in impudence. But how was he to be put in? The golden plate contained no instructions on this point. The prince looked at the hole and saw but one way. He put both his legs into it, sitting on the stone, and stooping forward, covered the corner that remained open with his 2 hands. In this uncomfortable position he resolved to abide his fate, and turning to the people said, "Now you can go." The king had already gone home to dinner. "Now you can go," repeated the princess after him like a parrot. The people obeyed her and went. Presently a little wave flowed over the stone and wetted one of the prince's knees. But he did not mind it much. He began to sing, and the song he sang was this: "As a world that has no well, darkly bright in forest dell, as a world without the gleam of the downward-going stream, as a world without the glance of the ocean's fair expanse, as a world where never rain glittered on the sunny plain, such my heart thy world would be, if no love did flow in thee. As a world without the sound of the rivulets underground, or the bubbling of the spring out of darkness wandering, or the mighty rush and flowing of the rivers downward going, or the music showers that drop out the outspread beach's top, or the ocean's mighty voice with his lifted waves rejoice, such my soul the world would be, if no love did sing in thee. Lady, keep thy world's delight, keep the waters in thy sight. Love had made me strong to go for thy sake to realms below, where the waters shine and hum, through the darkness never come. Let, I pray, one thought of me spring a little well in thee, lest thy loveless soul be found like a dry and thirsty ground." "Sing again, prince, it makes it less tedious," said the princess. But the prince was too much overcome to sing any more, and a long pause followed. "This is very kind of you, prince," said the princess at last, quite coolly, as she lay in the boat with her eyes shut. "I'm sorry I can't return the compliment," thought the prince, "but you are worth dying for, after all." Again a wavelet, and another, flowed over the stone and wetted both the prince's knees, but he did not speak or move. 2, 3, 4 hours passed in this way, the princess apparently asleep, and the prince very patient. But he was much disappointed in his position, for he had none of the consolation he had hoped for. At last he could bear it no longer. "Princess," said he. But at the moment up started the princess, crying, "I'm afloat! I'm afloat!" and the little boat bumped against the stone. "Princess," repeated the prince, encouraged by seeing her wide awake and looking eagerly at the water. "Well," she said, without looking round. Your papa promised that you should look at me, and you haven't looked at me once." "Did he? Then I suppose I must. But I'm so sleepy." "Sleep then, darling, and don't mind me," said the poor prince. "Really, you are very good," replied the princess. "I think I will go to sleep again." "Just give me a glass of wine and a biscuit first," said the prince, very humble. "With all my heart," said the princess, and gaped as she said it. She got the wine and the biscuit, however, and leaning over the side of the boat toward him, was compelled to look at him. "Why, Prince," she said, "you don't look well. Are you sure you don't mind it?" "Not a bit," answered he, feeling very faint indeed. "Only I shall die before it is of any use to you unless I have something to eat." "There, then," she said, holding out the wine to him. "Ah, you must feed me. I dare not move my hands. The water would run away directly." "Good gracious," said the princess, and she began at once to feed him with bits of biscuit and sips of wine. As she fed him, he contrived to kiss the tips of her fingers now and then. She did not seem to mind it one way or the other, but the prince felt better. "Now, for your own sake, princess," said he, "I cannot let you go to sleep. You must sit and look at me, else I shall not be able to keep up." "Well, I will do anything I can to oblige you," answered she with condescension, and sitting down she did look at him, and kept looking at him with wonderful steadiness, considering all things. The sun went down, and the moon rose, and gush after gush the waters were rising up the prince's body. They were up to his waist now. "Why can't we go and have a swim?" said the princess. "There seems to be water enough just about here." "I shall never swim more," said the prince. "Oh, I forgot," said the princess, and was silent. So the water grew and rose up and up on the prince, and the princess sat and looked at him. She fed him now and then. The night wore on. The waters rose and rose. The moon rose likewise higher and higher, and shone full on the face of the dying prince. The water was up to his neck. "Will you kiss me, princess?" said he feebly. The nonchalance was all gone now. "Yes, I will," answered the princess, and kissed him with a long, sweet, cold kiss. "Now," said he, with a sigh of content, "I die happy." He did not speak again. The princess gave him some wine for the last time. He was past eating. Then she sat down again and looked at him. The water rose and rose. It touched his chin. It touched his lower lip. It touched between his lips. He shut them hard to keep it out. The princess began to feel strange. It touched his upper lip. He breathed through his nostrils. The princess looked wild. It covered his nostrils. Her eyes looked scared and shone strange in the moonlight. His head fell back, the water closed over it, and the bubbles of his last breath bubbled up through the water. The princess gave a shriek and sprang into the lake. She laid hold first of one leg and then of the other, and pulled and tugged, but she could not move either. She stopped to take breath, and that made her think that he could not get any breath. She was frantic. She got hold of him and held his head above the water, which was possible now his hands were no longer on the hole. But it was of no use, for he was past breathing. Love and water brought back all her strength. She got under the water and pulled with her whole might, till at last she got one leg out. The other followed easily. How she got him into the boat she never could tell, but when she did, she fainted away. Coming to herself, she seized the oars, kept herself as steady as best she could, and rowed, though she had never rowed before. Round rocks and over shallows and through mud she rowed, till she got to the landing stairs of the palace. By this time her people were on the shore, for they had heard her shriek. She made them carry the prince to her own room and lay him in her bed, and light a fire and send for the doctors. "But the lake, your highness," said the chamberlain, who, roused by the noise, came in his nightcap. "Go and drown yourself in it," she said. This was the last rudeness of which the princess was ever guilty, and one must allow that she had good cause to feel provoked with the Lord Chamberlain. Had it been the king himself, he would have fared no better, but both he and the queen were fast asleep, and the chamberlain went back to his bed. Somehow the doctors never came, so the princess and her old nurse were left with the prince, but the old nurse was a wise woman and knew what to do. They tried everything for a long time without success. The princess was nearly distracted between hope and fear, but she tried on and on, one thing after another, and everything over and over again. And when they had all but given it up, Just as the sun rose, the prince opened his eyes. Chapter 15. Look at the rain. The princess burst into a passion of tears and fell on the floor. There she lay for an hour, and her tears never ceased. All the pent-up crying of her life was spent now. And a rain came on, such as had never been seen in that country. The sun shone all the time, and the great drops which fell straight to the earth shone likewise. The palace was in the heart of a rainbow. It was a rain of rubies and sapphires and emeralds and topazes. The torrents poured from the mountains like molten gold. And if it had not been for its subterraneous outlet, the lake would have overflowed and inundated the country. It was full from shore to shore. But the princess did not heed the lake. She lay on the floor and wept. And this rain within doors was far more wonderful than the rain out of doors, for when it abated a little and she proceeded to rise, she found to her astonishment that she could not. At length, after many efforts, she succeeded in getting upon her feet, but she tumbled down again directly. Hearing her fall, her old nurse uttered a yell of delight and ran to her, screaming, "My darling child, she's found her gravity!" "Oh, that's it, is it?" said the princess, rubbing her shoulder and her knee alternately. "I consider it very unpleasant. I feel as if I should be crushed to pieces." "Hurrah!" cried the prince from the bed. "If you've come round, princess, so have I. How's the lake?" "Brimful," answered the nurse. "Then we're all happy." "That we are indeed," answered the princess, sobbing. And there was rejoicing all over the country that rainy day. Even the babies forgot their past troubles and danced and crowed amazingly. And the king told stories, and the queen listened to them. And he divided the money in his box, and she the honey in her pot to all the children. And there was such jubilation as was never heard of before. Of course, the prince and princess were betrothed at once. But the princess had to learn to walk, and before they could be married with any propriety. And this was not so easy at her time of life, for she could walk no more than a baby. She was always falling down and hurting herself. "Is this the gravity you used to make so much of?" said she one day to the prince as he raised her from the floor. "For my part, I was a great deal more comfortable without it." "No, no, that's not it. This is it," replied the prince, and he took her up and carried her about like a baby, kissing her all the time. "This is gravity." "That's better," said she. "I don't mind that so much." And she smiled the sweetest, loveliest smile in the prince's face. And she gave him one little kiss in return for all of his, and he thought them overpaid, for he was beside himself with delight. I fear she complained of her gravity more than once after this, notwithstanding. It was a long time before she got reconciled to walking, but the pain of learning it was quite counterbalanced by two things, either of which would have been sufficient consolation. The first was that the prince himself was her teacher, and the second was that she could tumble into the lake as often as she pleased. Still, she preferred to have the prince jump in with her, and the splash they made before was nothing to the splash they made now. The lake never sank again. In process of time, it wore the roof of the cavern quite through and was twice as deep as before. The only revenge the princess took upon her aunt was to tread pretty hard on her gouty toe the next time she saw her. But she was sorry for it the very next day, when she heard the water had undermined her house, and that it had fallen in the night, burying her in its ruins, whence no one ever ventured to dig up her body. There she lies to this day. So the prince and princess lived and were happy, and had crowns of gold, and clothes of cloth, and shoes of leather, and children of boys and girls, not one of whom was ever known on the most critical occasion to lose the smallest atom of his or her due proportion of gravity. And that's the end of that George MacDonald fairy tale. We'll go on now to another one, The Day Boy and the Night Girl. Chapter 1. Watho. There was once a witch who desired to know everything. But the wiser a witch is, the harder she knocks her head against the wall when she comes to it. Her name was Watho, and she had a wolf in her mind. She cared for nothing in itself, only for knowing it. She was not naturally cruel, but the wolf had made her cruel. She was tall and graceful, with white skin, red hair, and black eyes which had a red fire in them. She was straight and strong, but now and then would fall bent together, shudder, and sit for a moment with her head turned over her shoulder, as if the wolf had got out of her mind onto her back. 2. Aurora. This witch got 2 ladies to live with her. One of them belonged to the court, and her husband had been sent on a far and difficult embassy. The other was a young widow whose husband had died lately, and who had since lost her sight. Watho lodged them in different parts of her castle, and they did not know of each other's existence. The castle stood on the side of a hill sloping gently down into a narrow valley, in which was a river with a pebbly channel and a continual song. The garden went down to the bank of the river, enclosed by high walls, which crossed the river and stopped. Each wall had a double row of battlements, and between the rows was a narrow walk. In the topmost story of the castle, the Lady Aurora occupied a spacious apartment of several large rooms looking southward. The windows projected oriel-wise over the garden below, and there was a splendid view from them both up and down and across the river. The opposite side of the valley was steep, but not very high. Far away, snow peaks were visible. These rooms Aurora seldom left, but their airy spaces, the brilliant landscape and sky, the plentiful sunlight, the musical instruments, books, pictures, curiosities, with the company of Watho, who made herself charming, precluded all dullness. She had venison and feathered game to eat, milk and pale, sunny, sparkling wine to drink. She had hair of the yellow gold, waved and rippled. Her skin was fair, not white like Watho's, and her eyes were of the blue of the heavens when bluest. Her features were delicate but strong, her mouth large and finely curved, and haunted with smiles. 3. Vesper. Behind the castle, the hill rose abruptly. The northeastern tower, indeed, was in contact with the rock and communicated with the interior of it. For in the rock was a series of chambers, known only to Watho and the one servant whom she trusted, called Falca. Some former owner had constructed these chambers after the tomb of an Egyptian king, and probably with the same design, for in the center of one of them stood what could only be a sarcophagus, but that and others were walled off. The sides and roofs of them were carved in low relief and curiously painted. Here the witch lodged the blind lady, whose name was Vesper. Her eyes were black, with long black lashes. Her skin had a look of darkened silver, but was of purest tint and grain. Her hair was fine and black and straight-flowing. Her features were exquisitely formed, and if less beautiful, yet more lovely from sadness. She always looked as if she wanted to lie down and not rise again. She did not know she was lodged in a tomb, though now and then she wondered that she never touched a window. There were many couches covered with richest silk, and soft as her own cheek for her to lie upon, and the carpets were so thick she might have cast herself down anywhere, as befitted a tomb. The place was dry and warm, and cunningly pierced for air, so that it was always fresh, and lacked only sunlight. There the witch fed her upon milk, and wine dark as a carbuncle, and pomegranates, and purple grapes, and birds that dwell in marshy places. And she played to her mournful tunes, and caused wailful violins to attend her, and told her sad tales, thus holding her ever in an atmosphere of sweet sorrow. 4. Photogen. Watho at length had her desire, for witches often get what they want. A splendid boy was born to the fair Aurora. Just as the sun rose, he opened his eyes. Watho carried him immediately to a distant part of the castle, and persuaded the mother that he never cried but once, dying the moment he was born. Overcome with grief, Aurora left the castle as soon as she was able, and Watho never invited her again. And now the witch's care was that the child should not know darkness. Persistently she trained him, until at last he never slept during the day, and never woke during the night. She never let him see anything black, and kept even all dull colors out of his way. Never, if she could help it, would she let a shadow fall upon him, watching against shadows as if they had been live things that would hurt him. All day he basked in the full splendor of the sun in the same large rooms his mother had occupied. Watho used him to the sun until he could bear more of it than any dark-blooded African. In the hottest of every day she stripped him and laid him in it, that he might ripen like a peach, and the boy rejoiced in it and would resist being dressed again. She brought all her knowledge to bear on making his muscles strong and elastic and swiftly responsive, that his soul, she said laughingly, might sit in every fiber, be all in every part, and awake the moment of call. His hair was of the red gold, but his eyes grew darker as he grew until they were as black as Vesper's. He was the merriest of creatures, always laughing, always loving, for a moment raging, then laughing again. Watho called him Photogen. 5. Nycteris. 5 or 6 months after the birth of Photogen, the Dark Lady also gave birth to a baby. In the windowless tomb of a blind mother, in the dead of night, under the feeble rays of a lamp in an alabaster globe, a girl came into the darkness with a wail. And just as she was born for the first time, Vesper was born for the second, and passed into a world as unknown to her as this was to her child, who would have to be born yet again before she could see her mother. Watho called her Nycteris, and she grew as like Vesper as possible, in all but one particular. She had the same dark skin, dark eyelashes and brows, dark hair, and gentle, sad look, but she had just the eyes of Aurora, the mother of Photogen, and if they grew darker as she grew older, it was only a darker blue. Watho, with the help of Falca, took the greatest possible care of her, in every way consistent with her plans, that is, the main point in which was that she should never see any light but what came from the lamp. Hence her optic nerves, and indeed her whole apparatus for seeing, grew both larger and more sensitive. Her eyes, indeed, stopped short only of being too large. Under her dark hair and forehead and eyebrows they looked like two breaks in a cloudy night sky, through which peeped the heaven where the stars and no clouds live. She was a sadly dainty little creature. No one in the world except those two were aware of the being of the little bat. Watho trained her to sleep during the day and wake during the night. She taught her music, in which she was herself proficient, and taught her scarcely anything else. So that is the day boy and the night girl, and we will follow their adventures next time. Thank you.